Welcome, everyone. My name is Duncan Moon. I cover education for Arizona Public Media, and I'll be your host this evening. Tonight, we'll be focusing on the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic and how that's affected the lives of some of our educators and school counselors. Now, just a couple of thoughts. We're not here tonight to try to come to any real conclusions, what's right or wrong, or what the ultimate solutions are. We're here to listen and ask questions and to learn from those who have been facing the pandemic challenges in education firsthand, both in and out of the classroom over the last couple of years. We'll start by asking a few prep questions, but the educators will also they'll be talking with each other, asking questions of each other. And of course, we'd like to invite you, if you're joining us on social media, ask student questions as well. Please feel free to post your questions on Facebook, and we'll try to get as many of those answered as we can. So our experts tonight, we are honored to have with us. We have Anthony Mendoza. He's a fourth grade teacher at Liberty Elementary. That's in the Sunnyside School District. Emily Ríos, she's a Spanish teacher at Tanque Verde High School. And Meg Tully is MTSS Facilitator, coordinator, and former history teacher at University High School, which is part of TUSD. Before we get started, Meg, tell us quickly, what is an MTSS Facilitator?
That's a great question. So MTSS stands for the Multi-Tiered System of Support, and it is a system where basically that is utilized by our district and districts across the country that is designed to provide academic and behavioral supports for students who may need it, and also to identify and implement appropriate interventions. So at my site, we focus a lot on academic interventions for students who need that extra support, like with academic skills. But you can see it at every level, at elementary level, middle school, high school. It's a really common system. And so my role is really to meet with students, identify what their needs are, identify appropriate interventions, network with lots of people. I work very closely with the counseling department. I may work with dropout prevention services. I may work with social emotional services as well, administration, contacting parents, of course, working a lot with teachers and students. So again, it's a facilitator and a coordinator. You're bringing all these pieces together to help find students and find solutions to problems that you don't even know exist yet.
Terrific. Certainly of great value during this pandemic. So we're looking pretty much, I think, at 2 years here, 2021 and 2020. It made some significant changes, forced significant changes in education. Some maybe temporary, some permanent. Most recently with this surge in the Omicron variant, it's made things significantly more complicated and more stressful. Tonight, we're going to take a look at issues, challenges, successes, all that you are experiencing in your schools and classrooms. Again, I'll start with some prepared questions, but we'd love for you all to feel free to play off each other, ask other questions, and provide any additional perspectives as they come to you. But let's start off with I guess we can start with a now. How are you all doing right now? What challenges are you facing currently? When you head off to work in the morning in 2022, what things are top of your mind? Anybody want to start? Go ahead, Emily.
I was thinking as you were asking that question, right now what's going through my mind as I go to work is I really am trying my best to stay healthy. I have already been out for 3 weeks this year just due to close contacts and other school closures. I am fortunate enough that I haven't had COVID at this point, but every time we get one of those close contacts or those quarantines, that's a lot of time out for my students having missed me in the classroom. And so right now I'm just trying to stay healthy and show up to work every single day so I could provide them with the instruction that they need. And I know a lot of my colleagues are going through that as well. Them staying healthy, but also being afraid that one of their children or their family members might have a close contact or get COVID themselves. And so I know that that's on our minds a lot.
Sure. Anthony, what about you? Go ahead.
Yeah, and for me, I kind of echo the same as Emily that, going to work, what am I doing to make sure that I stay healthy for not just my family here, but also, my school family, my kids. I'm gonna make sure that I stay as healthy as I can to be there. I fortunately have not had to quarantine. I've had cases in my room, but I haven't had to quarantine or miss any time due to COVID. So I'm grateful for that every single day. But the other thing that always comes into my mind is, okay, how many students am I going to have today? Am I going to get another email that's going to give me a medically excused for some of my students? On average, the absences, and what am I going to do for those students, and how am I going to help them when they come back? Those are pretty much the things that I go through, and a lot of my colleagues have gone through. Is how we're going to help? How are we going to bring these kids up that are out through no fault of their own? So that's basically what we're feeling.
Sure. Meg, what about you? What are you dealing with in the morning?
So one of the things that really weighs on me is just how great the need is right now for students and just all the support that they need. And my role is providing that additional support. And I was just telling my coworker today that, like, I wish I could clone myself like 2 or 3 times, because every student I meet with, it's not nearly enough time to provide them everything that they need. I mean, I wish I could spend a whole day with them, but the list is so long. And then I frequently receive emails from parents. Can you meet with my student? Can you meet with this kid? Teachers will email me and say, I'm concerned about this student. They haven't been in school the entire semester. So there's just our students just need so much support right now. And as teachers, it's really easy to become a martyr and to just give and give and give. But we've been doing that for so long with the pandemic. It's really been draining. And so also for our own mental health and sanity and making sure that we don't burn out, because we're seeing that in the profession as well, we also have to draw hard boundaries. And so while I recognize there's such a great need and I wish there was so much I could do, and part of me would, right after this wants to like hop on my email and keep sending stuff out and working so that I'm better for the next day and I can do more for the students, I also have to stop and say there's a boundary now. And I wasn't necessarily good at establishing those boundaries before the pandemic, but now it's something that I need, my family needs. And I see more and more educators doing that. And that is really hard, because we are here for the kids. We want to work for the kids. But the martyrdom culture can be very toxic. And so I'm seeing more and more teachers saying, you know what, I recognize that they have needs, but I have needs too. And we have to establish some boundaries if we're going to be able to survive.
Absolutely. Well, again, there was an NEA poll that just came out. And nearly all 90% of them are saying that burnout is a serious problem for teachers, and that the fact that the teacher shortage has gotten so much worse during the pandemic means people are stretching farther than ever. All 3 of you spoke about caring for your students and being there for them, and how are you going to help them when they're struggling. Meg, you've talked a little bit about how you've dealt with this, but Anthony and Emily, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on that. Anybody want to start?
Are you talking about
just how are you dealing with the stress and the potential burnout?
Oh, exercise and eating healthy candy. No, I mean, honestly,
Candy.
you know what I mean? No, I'm just kidding. Honestly, for me, focusing on trying to focus more on the positive than the negative that's kind of going out there. Focusing on the gains that our students are making, focusing on the things that are really important. And I know Emily had talked about it earlier when she talked about, the mental health and putting that in the forefront for sure. And building those relationships with the kids. For me, I found that our relationship coming back with these kids have been a lot better. And kind of getting to know these kids on a personal level, and they kind of get to know me on a personal level, and just kind of feeling like we're kind of in this together as a team. And that kind of gets me through the day, especially with the burnout and the extra stuff and things that happen like that. Just that light bulb for the kids, the whole reason, focusing on the reason why I became a teacher in the first place, and seeing that is basically what's been helping me to stay strong through a lot of this, is what's been going on.
Emily, I see you nodding.
Yeah, I agree entirely with that. I feel that the relationships with the kids sometimes, just feeling so proud of them for overcoming in these really challenging circumstances that are, unprecedented in our times. They're going through something very challenging. And so, like Anthony said, building relationships with students has become, more important to me than it has ever been, because with those relationships, then the trust is built, and then the learning can happen. And then we are sure that the mental health is there because we know, because the students are willing to share with us. And so I think that's one of my most important things this year. But I also think that Meg is right. Like, I think teachers worked harder over the pandemic when it first began than they have ever worked in their lives. And teachers work hard. I know that most teachers, even though if we were home, we're working until 10, 11, 12 o'clock at night to prepare for the next day. Because we were home, we had a hard time making those boundaries, because there was no leaving for work, coming home, and now we turn off. It was all one thing. And we were also having our kids home at the same time. So we're kind of doing dual roles of dual teaching. So I think Meg nailed it when she said, learning self-care and learning to set boundaries. And so those are some of the things I'm doing to kind of make sure that I don't burn out.
Sure, makes perfect sense. We keep hearing about the challenges of the pandemic. School has never been easy for kids growing up. I remember being a teenage boy, and sometimes I wonder how I ever made it through all of that. But I see you, Anthony, nodding there. But the pandemic has been an extraordinary time, and so we're focused on mental health. Are there new ways that each of you look at your students and what you're looking for, and how you're trying to keep ahead of that, or how you're trying to do remedial things to help them cope mentally? I'd love if you could share some of that. Anybody want to start on that? Go ahead, Emily.
So I was thinking that one of the things I learned last year during the pandemic is that some students are not as willing to share. So knowing their mental health status is not always something that's obvious. And so it sometimes takes the teacher to reach out online. That was really difficult to do because we were in a public forum, just like we are now, where you couldn't really just pull a kid aside like you could in the classroom. And so finding creative ways to figure out, for me, that was a lot of calling home. And what I found was students are under a great deal of pressure, I think, in general, nowadays. And so when you added this pandemic where they felt like they were missing it, or they didn't have their social interactions to kind of keep them steady, and they, really could kind of go down a dark hole. Some kids did fine. Some kids were great online and they were okay. But for other kids, it was probably one of the hardest things that they've ever gone through in their lives. And so kind of just being willing to accept that there are these two vast different spectrums that students went through, and then just kind of being aware of what to look for. And then for me, reaching out to them at that point, calling home, talking to family members, talking to counselors. For me, something that helped was also talking to other teachers. So if they had that same student, kind of reaching out and saying, what do you know? And we kind of created a network last year where teachers would meet together and we'd talk about like grade units. So, some teachers have better relationships with students than others. So we kind of would tag team the situation, and we'd strategize and we'd share, okay, this worked for me. Try this in your class. So collaborating and working together to support students was one really beautiful thing that came out of the pandemic.
Wow. Is it harder to read students through a screen than it is in the classroom? Yeah.
Major difference.
Yeah,
especially if their screen is off.
With an icon. I was just about to say that. Yeah, it's hard to read the icon there that they have on there. So yeah.
One thing that I have seen, particularly at UHS, which is a college prep school, and it has for many, many years had this culture of excellence and high achievement, high standards. And it's not just at UHS. I see this at high schools, and then talking to colleagues, is we really have to adjust, again, how we define achievement, and really make it more personal. And I tell students that I'm working with right now, like, you have to decide what's happiness for you, and what is success for you, and what's acceptable for you. But really evaluating, sorry, my dogs, that the traditional expectations of achievement and excellence, and understanding that, like I tell my students, bad grades do not make you a bad person. Guess what? I struggled with chemistry in high school as well, but I've been able to go on and, have a life that I'm really quite happy with. And I see that also at the college level. Some of the research that I'm seeing and some of the programs that we even work with are encouraging the schools, even pre-pandemic, but now especially, to really kind of reevaluate that culture of achievement and think about the pressure that we are putting on kids. And I think the pandemic has done a really good job of helping schools and parents take that foot off the gas, right?
Mm-hmm.
If I can add to that, I was thinking that mastery grading and evaluating how we assess students, right? So we live in a culture where this grading system, these A's and these B's and these C's, are so deeply ingrained in our society. And this is what parents had, and this is what students are used to. But kind of reassessing what that looks like, and not giving grades based on completion or on compliance, but on really checking for that understanding of the material. And so that often can look different. And so it still can be that traditional grading system, like allowing students to have opportunities for retakes or doing formative assessments along the way to kind of check in on a smaller scale instead of waiting to the huge summative assessments. So at our school, we've been really experimenting, and we've really been trying new things to kind of figure out, what best supports students in a way where we're making sure that they're achieving those learning targets.
Sure, makes sense. Go ahead.
Yeah, and to kind of add to that, in our district, Sunnyside District as a whole, we are moving our practices for formative assessment. And there's a lot of work that is formative assessment. That's more of that day-to-day check-ins. For those that don't know the difference between formative and summative, it's more of that day-to-day. How are they progressing throughout the day? How is it that they're progressing throughout the week? Not necessarily waiting, well, okay, this is our unit, and now we're going to have this big unit summative test after like a month of, lesson or whatever. So for us, we're focusing on that day-to-day. How's what is happening in our school, how is that dictating what we're teaching as we move forward? And again, it's more of that focus on not necessarily perfection and getting it right now, but are you progressing? Are you moving forward? Can we see that you're moving forward? You may not have it yet, but we can see that you're getting there, and eventually you'll get there through some of the practices and through some of the reteachings that we might have to do and things like that.
Yes, makes perfect sense. Maybe this sort of leads into a little bit, a nice little bit of a segue, but we keep hearing a lot about the gaps and the losses and triggering concern, including in students. And I think you're beginning to touch on how you deal with that. How are you each approaching these concerns?
Well, I would say that with our students, because they hear it on the media, they hear it from their parents, this idea of learning loss, and it causes them a great deal of stress. Like they've somehow lost something that they're never going to get back again. And so with my students, we talk about it because they hear those words, but I don't like that term learning loss. They didn't really lose anything. They were doing everything that happened to them happened to pretty much everyone in the entire world at this time. So they're right where everyone else is. They haven't lost it. It's just maybe been slowed down or delayed slightly, and they were made to shift and focus on other more important things. Maybe it was their physical health or the health of their families, their mental health. And so they learned a lot along this journey of the pandemic. And so also supporting them and letting them know, we're going to get you there. We're going to get you to where you need to be. You will recoup everything that you feel you may have lost along the way. And so just supporting them and not making them feel that they are just somewhere in a place where they're never going to recover.
Yeah, I see.
Go ahead, Meg.
Building off of the previous question, and with this one, I see a lot of teachers doing what they can to meet kids where they're at. I know of an English department at another high school in the district where they got together and they decided collectively that they were just going to shift their curriculum to where the students needed to be. And that has actually been much more successful in allowing students to feel a sense of success, because if a student continually feels like they're failing, they start to shut down. If they continually feel stressed and anxious, that is blinding to learning and to creativity and to problem solving. So giving kids chances to make up tests, to redo things, to ask more questions, to turn in late work. The teachers are just that I see and that I work with I'm so amazed by what they are doing. And I've seen them taking bigger educational risks and instructional risks that are really paying off. And I don't know if they would have been comfortable taking those risks before the pandemic.
Sure. So you're kind of meeting them where they are.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and as far as like for the elementary side of that, you know, I like what Emily said about. I mean, you didn't lose anything. It's just delayed, and basically, you know, that's. I love what you said about that. I honestly do, because that is very true. And helping these kids to see that they didn't lose, but they gained. What are the skills that you gained while you learned how to get on a computer? Or you learned how to do this. You may not have maybe the academics part of it, you know, because that was delayed a little bit, but you did learn, you did gain. You do have a lot of our students have, you know, a greater sense of student agency and identity, because they know who they are as learners. They know what they're capable of doing at a young age, and it's interesting to see it at this very young age that they're developing to have that sense of, well, maybe I don't have it yet. And then a lot of them are just starting to develop that growth mindset, starting to push forward. Hey, I don't have it yet, but I'm going to move forward and I'm going to get it. So
Sure. Sounds to me very much like this is the coaching aspect of teaching. Yeah, good. Well, one of the questions that we had asked the students last week was, you know, being home and dealing with family in the school, you know, their rooms and things. But you guys have had to deal with families. I've heard teachers say that they've found new levels of communication with families, but they also had to find and get at what was happening with their students at home. Can you talk a little bit about the relationship with families during the pandemic as educators? Anybody want to start with that?
I've never talked to as many parents as I did during the pandemic. I think it was a great experience for me as a teacher to grow. I think sometimes it can be scary, sometimes calling home. It also, for me, I sometimes worry if I call home, am I damaging the relationship with the student? Because I teach high school, and so you're trying to build their trust. And sometimes they'll feel like if you call home, then that trust is broken. Mm-hmm. And so for me, that was difficult to navigate. You know, I want to talk to you and I want to keep this between us. You know, I want to give you a chance to learn and grow without me having to contact your parents. But also sometimes I need to contact your parents because I need to know what's going on and how best to support you. I also found that, you know, as hard as it was for us teachers, it was really hard for parents during the pandemic to figure out, you know, what to do to support their kids. They're balancing their work from home possibly, or maybe they still had to go to work. And so they had to leave their students behind or find alternatives, places for them to go. And so communicating with parents was really key and very helpful for both of us. They, you know, sometimes had questions and needed me to give them some advice on how to support them at home. But also sometimes I needed their support and I needed them to help me and back me up when it came to learning and instruction online.
I'd like to echo that.
Go ahead, Meg. Go ahead.
I've seen more parent frustration. And frustration, you know, is more about how can I help my kid? Or we're trying to do these things and it's not working. You know, a lot of the traditional systems that we relied upon aren't producing the same results. And we're also seeing frustrations beyond that. You know, everything from frustrations over the pandemic. You know, I used to say that like education could be very divisive, and but now it's you know, if it was here, it is here. In terms of the spectrum, we have parents that are very concerned about the health and well-being of their children. You know, been being exposed to COVID. We have parents who are very frustrated with mask mandates and things like that. And one thing I always go back to, and this was a saying I had pre-pandemic as a classroom teacher in meeting with parents, is that we are a team. Like we are a team working towards the same goal, which is the success of your child. And it may be that we have to adjust what our expectations are and how we define that success. And I always emphasize success is subjective, right? It does not necessarily mean we're all going to Harvard. And I think that's really important to remember, is that we are on the same team. We are working towards the same goal, the success of the student, you know, the classroom teacher, the parent, the student is an important role. And I tell that to students as well. Like, you got to understand, like, we are here to help you. We are here to support you. And if you need help, it is okay to ask. And that's another thing that I see is students are afraid to ask. And so we work on self-advocacy. Sometimes we even practice what questions are you going to ask when you go in to talk to that teacher, and helping parents understand how to navigate, the digital systems at home. Some teachers may use a website, some teachers may use Google, some teachers may use Microsoft Teams, and that can also be frustrating for parents. So just finding ways to really kind of put us all on the same page, establish clear lines of communication, and remind them we are a team working towards the same goal.
Great. Anthony, go ahead.
For sure, it's interesting because when we were online, we were in the homes. We were in homes and you see interesting things as Emily talked about. I saw in the background, I saw, working parents from home, or maybe they were at a YMCA, or they, even one of the sad, situations, maybe they're at their parents' work. I even had students that they were actually at work with their parent, going through these kinds of things. And when you notice these things and when you see these things, you really do want to communicate with those parents. You do really want to talk to them. It's interesting because you talked about parent communication. I would even have some parents come on to their kids' Zoom and, what can you repeat that, Mr. Mendoza? Because I don't understand what they're supposed to do. I was like, well, yeah, we could talk about it after, when the kids leave, but it's interesting because we were in their homes and they were in our classroom. So, communication became big, and I hadn't talked or reached out to as many parents as I ever in my career as well. And it's always good, and to build that team, that we are a team. We have a common goal. The interest of the child is always at the forefront of everything that we do. And honestly, I think sometimes as teachers and as parents, we forget that, because I'm a parent as well. I have a high schooler and I have a middle schooler, and we just need to make sure that we're on the same page and we communicate with the teachers to drive our education forward. So it's key.
Fascinating. In covering, for a while back, I covered education across the Southeast, which has some very specific challenges with education. But one of the things that we kept coming across was when parents are involved in their children's education, it's stronger, it's better. It sounds like you've had both here. You've had parents who are very politically divided and angry, but also having, out of necessity, to be in greater contact with parents. Have you found that relationships are better or more challenging because of the pandemic?
I would say, yeah, go ahead, Anthony.
Yeah, I think so.
I would say, well, for me, it's kind of both. It depends on the day, I think. I mean, it depends. Honestly, there's so much going on, and it could really depend on the day. Did something emotional happen to that parent or with the teacher, or is there something going on? Because a lot of the times with the communication, if we're not controlling that emotional part of it, it comes out in our conversations, and I know I've had to make sure that when I talk, I got to get myself in the right place to talk. But if you can't do that, if you can't regulate that way, sometimes it comes off as something maybe you didn't mean to say, or you didn't mean for it to come out that way, or it's misunderstood. And honestly, I think, again, it depends on a lot. Sometimes we have these great conversations where everything is great, and it seems like the very next day it's like, whoa, what happened? So that's just been some of my experience throughout the past year and a half here. So
Emily, go ahead.
Yeah, I would agree 100%. I feel that during the pandemic, like I said before, when I would make those calls home when that was necessary, I often found that the situation maybe was more so than just the class or the grade or just the student. There was maybe some stuff going on at home. Maybe they had sick loved ones, or, stressful work situations, or were not able to work due to the pandemic. And so I think it was a very high time of stress for all people. And that if it's stressful at home, it's stressful for kids, because kids know that that's happening. They're sponges. And so I think that is where that communication really helped, is because for the teacher, understanding what's going on can really help us to address the situation in the way that's the most appropriate if we know what's happening. So those phone calls home were really, really useful. I had some difficult conversations with parents. and I had to be willing to, make that phone call. I think kind of like Anthony was talking about is like, it's in an email, it might not come off right. I also think emails take way longer to write than just having a conversation. And with the conversation, you get the feeling, you get the emotion, you get all of those things to make things clear. They can hear that you have sympathy in your voice and that you're understanding, which they might not get in an email. So I think we got the whole gamut of parent interactions and student interactions. And just like teachers are not always perfect, parents can not always be perfect. And that's okay. Just like for our students, there's ups and downs for everyone.
Meg, did you have something that you wanted to add there?
They've covered it very well. I would say one of my biggest takeaways is just parents are much more involved. And I think that's ultimately for the best. Parents are much more involved and have a much better understanding of like what their students are doing, or they want to understand what their students are doing. They want to support their students. So I just think the volume of parent interaction has increased for teachers. In my role, I spent a lot of time emailing parents and giving them updates and providing as much information as possible. And I think ultimately, like I said, this is going to be for the better. There are some difficult conversations, there are different opinions. But the long run is I do think we're going to see parents that are much more engaged in their child's education. And one of the other benefits that we're going to see come out of the pandemic is by making things a little bit more virtual, it also has made it more accessible. More families are going to have internet, more families are going to have technology in the home, more families are going to be able to send that email as well. Whereas, the digital divide may have been a factor that prevented parents from being able to interact and with their child's teachers and offer that support. So I think we're seeing this ultimately move in a positive direction.
Go ahead.
I have a question for everyone, because I was wondering as Megan was talking that last year I actually had some walls came down. I actually had to start giving out my personal cell phone number because we were at home. And so in the beginning of the year, we always call a group of students. So we have like a homeroom class. And so we would call home at the start of this school year. And I was calling with like call blocking from home. And nobody answers. Nobody answers the phone. And so I realized no one's going to answer if it's blocked. So I had to just, okay, everyone's going to have my phone number, but I need people to be able to call me. I don't know if you guys experienced anything similar to that. And it kind of was nice because they would call me when they needed things or they had questions.
Well, and for me, I mean, we've always talked about the personal part to keeping it separate. So there's a couple of things that I actually use. One, Class Dojo for sure is communication, kind of like text messaging. It's an app that you can use. But the other thing that I used was a Google Voice number. You could just set up a free number on Google Voice and just make those phone calls, and they can text you and call you, leave you messages. It's like if it was your personal number. And then eventually, once you stop using it, like I did, it expires and goes away. So, those were some of the workarounds that we used.
Yeah, I know counselors use a lot of like Google Voice and Google Numbers. Depending on the circumstances, if there's a parent that I need to have more frequent communication with, I don't mind giving them my cell phone number. I mean, that is my primary phone. And also for years pre-pandemic, I ran extracurricular programs, student council, student travel, where parents and students need to have my personal number and needed to be able to get a hold of me. And I can say that in 10 years, it was never abused. I never had students or parents are contacting me at outrageous times or contacting me to have inappropriate conversations. Sometimes text messaging is also a really great way to check in. And you can respond to the text, when it's in a convenient and appropriate time. That's not to say that like I'm going to put my personal cell phone on my email signature, but when the need arises, I don't really see an issue with that because, like I said, I really look at parents as peers, as teammates working towards the same goal. Mm-hmm. And I think the parents that are really invested, they understand appropriate communication for achieving this goal.
Yeah, sure. And it surely makes we all know it makes a difference when the phone rings and you recognize the name that pops up. It makes a huge difference in the number of calls that we pick up, or at least I do. I'm sure you guys are the same. Let me turn a corner just a little bit and ask, sort of looking at the big picture, what are some of the changes that you feel need to happen in education to provide adequate support for educators, for school staff, for, excuse me, counselors, administrators, students, families, everyone? What is the adequate support level that needs to be there?
Wow.
Where do we start?
Question.
I thought I better get that in before we had like 3 minutes left, but
Well, when I say things like, I wish I could clone myself, like, quite literally, we need more people working in education, especially right now. We need more instructional support staff, math interventionists, reading interventionists, more teacher assistants, paraprofessionals. And some of those roles have been created using ESSER funds. Like my role as an MTSS facilitator at UHS was created with ESSER funds, and it will only last a couple of years. But I do think that is one of the best ways we can use those funds. But the problem that we see is, even if we can hire a math interventionist or a counselor or an or whatever position, a curriculum service provider, there aren't people applying for the jobs, and a lot of these jobs that are funded are going unfilled. And so we need to get more, we need to not only get more people in education, we need to really retain the people we have, protect them from burning out, provide support. I think with as administrators, one of the most important things they need to do is really be there for their teachers, listen to them, support them, give them space, give them grace when necessary. And just understand, we're all human, and we're working on the same project. We all have very similar values here in education, but yeah, we really just need to expand our workforce. And that I've always thought that, even pre-pandemic, like, let's get 2 teachers in every classroom. One can teach, one can grade, one, or they can work on different small groups. We just need more boots on the ground.
And well, to add, and I definitely would echo that, but I would make it a little bit more of a caveat. I would say more qualified people to be in the classroom, because it is. I mean, we can definitely pull in people, and we can definitely do that kind of thing. But just to have a warm body in the classroom doesn't do any good either. So we needed to make sure that the people that we are training, that are coming out of, programs, like I know Sunnyside has a Pathways to Teaching program, where they're working with the U of A. So they have a U of A program that gets teachers and trains them and goes through how Sunnyside does things. So they're coming into Sunnyside ready to teach the way, Sunnyside District goes. So that kind of thing, having people come in that way, having people that are qualified to do some of the things, like you say. I would love to have another teacher. I mean, I know when I have like practicum teachers in there or other teachers in there with me, it definitely helps out because there's somebody that's educated, and focused, as opposed to just someone that's just in there. And we need qualified educators, and we need to retain our qualified educators. We need to, but one of the biggest things that always comes down to is funding and salary. How do you attract the best? I mean, if you look at like the best professional sports team, they're paying big money to bring in the big hitters, man, because why? That's what attracts. And that's why a lot of people are leaving our profession, because they do get burned out. And with our degree, we could go make more money working as a manager at Geico, so, and I had to do it. And that's sad. It's sad to say, because, we're here because we love the kids. And I know a lot of people always say, well, you became a teacher because you're not in it for the money and this, that, and the other. But well, I mean, I have to provide for my family too, so yeah, I mean, I love your kid. I want to educate your kid, but in the end, it comes down to, can I provide for my family? Can I support my family? Can I do the things as well? Because I need a competitive salary. And I think that, definitely in the education profession, we definitely need to prioritize education. And if we, like you had said earlier, that this is our future, right? The greatest investment we can make is the education of our kids and help them. And I don't see it as, pay raise. I see it as investing and investing in that way. So in the people to make it work. And that's what we need.
Emily, a thought there?
I think Anthony nailed it. I was going to say the same thing. I think we need legislation that supports educators. I think that we need, salaries is one thing that can be done, but there's a lot more that we need to do to support our teachers. I feel fortunate to be in a district that supports teachers and understands that teachers are the most important thing in schools, and that from the top in the district into our administration and our schools, we are given the respect of being treated like professionals because we are professionals. And I think that sometimes doesn't always happen in the field. So why would someone do an underpaid job and not be supported and not be treated like a professional? In addition to that, the only thing I would add is time. Like, we are all working our butts off. We might get 1 hour a day to do our planning and our preparation. That's a lot. Imagine having 6 meetings tomorrow and you get 1 hour to prepare for those 6 meetings. So it's not, teachers are not lazy. We're working our butts off. We're working nights. We're working weekends. We love our kids. And so we will do that. But should we have to be doing that? Or should we get some more time? That's one thing from the pandemic that I do miss is because I was at home and I wasn't driving to and from work, and because I had trouble setting barriers and time limits, I was able to call more parents. And that's because I made the time and I had the time to communicate. And I feel that communicating with families is probably the thing I miss the most. I have 200 kids. How much time do I get to communicate with their parents and let them know how they're doing? It's not much. So those are the 2 things I would say.
That's really helpful. Oh, well, we're winding down the last 5 or 10 minutes, but let me sort of throw things ahead just a little bit. What would you say are some of the priorities for the rest of this school year and looking forward to the next for each of you? Who wants to start there? Maybe I should give you 60 minutes to plan.
60 minutes. Oof.
Yeah.
All right. He's been generous at this time. So the question was, what's a priority moving forward here from now into the next school year? Yeah,
going forward.
For me, basically the priority that I have is just what it's been for kind of the past year and a half, a little bit focusing on the things that I can control within my classroom, definitely focusing on that and moving my kids forward in that area. There's so many outside circumstances, things that are pulling at you, meetings and this and that and whatever, and a lot of things we can't control. But the one thing I can control is my actions, my attitude in the classroom. So I'm gonna push my kids to be the best that they possibly could be. Focus on progress over perfection, and just make sure I love on them and support them, and make sure that they feel comfortable and ready to continue to move on in their educational journey as they move forward. That's basically what my focus is from now and probably for the rest of my career. That's where I want to be, So that's for me, anyways.
Thank you, Anthony.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that my priorities, which kind of stem originally from the pandemic, or they were heightened due to the pandemic, is one, building my relationships with my students and their families. And so that's been something that I greatly value. And I love getting to know my students. I love helping them learn and grow and be better. And then the other thing that I've really been focusing on since the pandemic, due to the constraints of all of it, is, just really focusing on the learning. Making the learning, as I think Anthony said earlier, are they growing? Are they getting better each day? No matter their level, you could be the best student in the class and have an A+, but are you learning every day? Are you growing every single day? Are you getting better? Or you could be a student that maybe is struggling a little bit. How can I support you? How can I get you to where you need to be? Are you growing every day? Even if it's just by one question or one word or one answer. And so that's really what I am trying to focus on, and finding strategies and techniques and research-based methods that help support learning in the classroom.
I would say, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, go ahead, Meg.
Okay, thank you. I would say a priority moving forward is being able to be flexible, being able to be adaptable, being able to come up with creative solutions to new problems. Returning to school, this year, a lot of people thought that it's back to normal. It is not back to normal. And teachers that have returned thinking like, okay, like last year was hard. I did all this adapting and made all these adjustments. They came back thinking like, all right, I'm just going to go back to the old curriculum and do things the way I did in fall of 2019. And that is not how it is. And I think teachers need to keep that in mind. Parents, students, administrators, right? We need to be flexible. We need to be adaptable. And I mentioned earlier, redefining what we mean by success, sort of reevaluating what we consider to be achievement and what is acceptable to different people and to different families, and really being able to meet students where they're at so they continue to be supported and not just set up to fail. Teachers need to support students. Administrators need to support teachers. So we retain our good teachers that are still here, because there are still very, very difficult days ahead. It's been a hard year and a half, but we're going to be cleaning up from this for several years. And so one thing that has stuck with me and helped me through my hardest days is a quote that I heard from an administrator earlier in the school year, which is that this is one of the most difficult times to work in education, but it is also one of the most important times to work in education. And so I've thought, I just remember that, and it keeps me going on hard days. It keeps me going after difficult conversations, or even prepares me for those difficult conversations. And so that's something we really need to keep in mind. Again, all the constituents, all the stakeholders, the students, the parents, the teachers, the administrators, hopefully at some point the legislatures as well. But yes, it is hard, but it is important.
Well, I think that rounds things out very nicely for us. Let me just look at the clock. Yeah, that's probably the fastest 45 minutes that I can remember in quite some time. But okay, well, let's first of all, thank you guys. Thank our educators for their time tonight. Again, a lot of energy here, and I know you all put in long days, but your willingness to share their experiences, your ideas, what's worked and what hasn't worked. For our viewers, we hope you'll join us Wednesday, February 16th. So not for a couple of weeks, 6:30 p.m. Again, we're going to hear from experts in counseling, adult services, and wellness education. And we'll try to address some of the current concerns and issues that were raised last week by our students, but also by our teachers and educators this week. If you have time, please, we have a brief survey about tonight's event, and we're really welcome your feedback. Your input, provides us at AZPM with just valuable insights, and it goes into a spreadsheet that allows us to really get a very clear picture of some things. So if you want to do that, go to AZPM/community conversations. There's more information. You can find resources there, and we'd love to have your participation. So thank you once again to our illustrious panel, Anthony Mendoza, fourth grade teacher at Liberty Elementary in the Sunnyside School District. Thank you, Emily Ríos, Spanish teacher at Tanque Verde High School, and Meg Tully, MTSS Facilitator, and not to be forgotten, former history teacher at University High School in TUSD. Thank you all for being with us tonight.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Good night.